My mother was a woman who could make you feel chosen and discarded in the same breath. She had this gift, if you could call it that, of arranging her affection like flowers in a vase, beautiful to look at from the right angle, but if you moved even slightly out of her line of sight, you simply ceased to exist. I was the middle child. My older sister Nadia was her favorite, quiet and obedient, the kind of daughter who never asked too many questions. My younger brother Zayn was the baby, always protected, always excused. And then there was me, Sarah, the one who felt things too loudly, cried too openly, needed too much. The panic attacks started the summer I turned 12. I didn't have a name for them then. I just knew that some mornings I would wake up and my chest felt like it was caving in, like something enormous was sitting on my ribs, and no matter how hard I breathed, I couldn't get enough air. My vision would narrow. My hands would shake. I would sit on the edge of my bed in the dark, counting tiles on the floor, trying to remember that I was real, that I was here, that I was okay. I never told anyone. In our house, falling apart was not something you did in front of people. Especially not in front of my mother. She had a way of turning your pain into an inconvenience. Once when I was 9, I fell off my bicycle and scraped both my knees badly enough that they bled through my shalwar. I came inside crying, and she looked at me, really looked at me, and then she said, "Go wash it off. Don't cry in front of the neighbors." That was it. No hug. No checking if I needed stitches. Just the reminder that my pain had an audience problem. So by 12, I had learned to manage myself very quietly, in corners, in bathrooms, in the dark of my own room with the door locked. The incident that broke something permanent in me happened in front of the whole family, which I now understand was always going to be how it happened with my mother. She never wounded you in private. There was always a witness, always a table full of people, because for her the performance of family was the point. It was Eid dinner. My maternal aunt had come from another city with her daughters, my cousins Hira and Sana, who were both older than me, 14 and 16. My mother had been preparing for days. New cushion covers on the sofa. Fresh flowers from the market. She'd cooked enough food for 20 people, and she kept straightening things that were already straight, the kind of anxious energy she only had when she wanted someone to be impressed. My aunt was the person she most wanted to impress, always had been. Halfway through dinner, my aunt said very casually, "Which school does Nadia go to now?" She must be doing so well. She looks so sharp. My mother lit up the way she only did when someone noticed Nadia. She talked for 5 minutes straight about Nadia's grades, Nadia's teachers' comments, Nadia's prospects. Nadia sat there glowing, and I sat next to her eating quietly, and I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was just how it was. Then my aunt looked at me. "And this one?" she asked. "Not my name. This one." My mother paused just briefly. Just a half second. But I felt that pause in my entire body. "Sarah," she said. "She's managing. Managing. Not doing well, not trying hard, not getting better, not sweet or funny or kind, managing. Like I was a problem that hadn't gotten worse yet. Like I was a mild fever they were monitoring." My aunt smiled politely and moved on. Hira and Senna were already talking about something else. Nadia didn't look at me. My father was serving himself more rice. The world continued turning, and I sat there at 12 years old with that word sitting on my chest like a stone. Managing. That night the panic attack was the worst one I'd ever had. I sat in the bathroom with the light off and the tap running so no one would hear me, and I pressed my back against the cold wall and tried to breathe, and I thought, what is wrong with me? Why am I not enough? What do I need to change? How do I become the kind of girl my mother would brag about? I was 12. I spent that night trying to diagnose what was broken in me instead of asking why a mother would look at her daughter and say managing in that tone in that company without flinching. I didn't understand for a long time that what my mother was doing had a name. Favoritism sounds too small for it. What she was doing was building a hierarchy inside our home where some of us were valued, and some of us were tolerated, and she enforced that hierarchy so consistently, so casually that by the time I was a teenager, I had completely internalized it. I genuinely believed I was the lesser child. I believed it the way you believe something you've been told your whole life without anyone ever saying it out loud. She never said you are not enough, Sarah. She said it in pauses. In the way her face changed when she talked about Nadia versus when she talked about me. In managing. The panic attacks followed me into my teens and into my 20s and finally into a therapist's office when I was 26 sitting across from a woman with kind eyes who asked me to describe my childhood home, and I spent 40 minutes talking, and when I finished she said quietly, "It sounds like you learned very early that your emotions were a burden." I started crying immediately. Not because it was new information, but because someone had finally said it plainly, and it felt like a window opening in a room I had been sealed in for 14 years. Therapy is slow. Anyone who has done it knows this. You don't walk in broken and walk out fixed. You walk in broken and you spend months carefully identifying each piece and understanding where it came from and deciding, consciously, painfully, what you want to do with it. I spent a long time deciding what I wanted to do about my mother. Because the complicated thing, the thing that nobody tells you about difficult mothers, is that you still love them. I loved my mother with a fierce and confused love that had been tangled up with hurt for so long, I couldn't separate the threads anymore. I wanted her approval the way you want oxygen. And that wanting had cost me so much. It had cost me my own voice, my own trust in my own feelings. Years of minimizing myself because she had minimized me first and I had simply continued the work. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most real things happen, gradually, and then suddenly. The gradually was years of therapy, of slowly rebuilding some interior sense of my own worth, of learning that a panic attack is not weakness, it is a nervous system that learned too young that it was not safe, of understanding that I was not managing, I was surviving, and surviving under those conditions had actually required enormous strength. This suddenly happened at my brother Zane's wedding 3 years ago. I was 31. I had come alone, which my mother had already made a comment about. The kind of comment that pretends to be concern, but is actually judgment dressed in a softer fabric. She had introduced me to her friends and I had watched her face as she did it, looking for that pause, and there it was. Still there after all these years, that half-second hesitation, before she found the right way to describe me to people she wanted to impress. But something was different this time. I watched her do it, and instead of feeling that familiar collapse inside me, I felt something else. I felt clear. I saw her very plainly, maybe for the first time, as a person who had never learned how to love without ranking, who was so afraid of not being impressive that she turned her own children into a measuring contest. I saw that her limitations had never been about me. They had always been about her. And that knowing, that clear, cold knowing, did not take away the grief of it, but it untangled something. I didn't make a scene. I didn't give a speech. I went home that night and I wrote her a letter I never sent. It was 3 pages long, and it said everything I had spent 19 years swallowing. I wrote it for me, not for her, because she had already shown me enough times that she wasn't ready to hear it, and I was done waiting for her to be ready before I allowed myself to feel it. What I did change was my access. Not dramatically, not all at once. But I started creating distance with intention. I stopped attending every family dinner. I stopped calling every Sunday. I stopped performing the version of myself that fit neatly into her expectations. And when I did show up, I showed up as the actual Sarah, the one with opinions and limits and the ability to say, actually, that's not something I'm comfortable with, and mean it. My mother found this deeply unsettling. She called Nadia to ask what was wrong with me. She sent messages asking why I was being cold. She showed up at my apartment once without calling, and I opened the door, and I stood in it, and I said, "This isn't a good time. You need to call before you come." She looked at me like I had spoken another language. Maybe I had. It was the language of someone who finally believed she was allowed to have a boundary. We are not estranged. I want to say that clearly because the story is not about cutting her off completely. It's about something harder and less dramatic than that. It's about choosing not to let her diminish me anymore while still being present enough that I do want lose the whole family with it. It's a negotiation I make with myself every time I drive to her house, every time. I pick up her call every time I sit at her table and feel that old familiar pull to shrink myself so she doesn't have to confront her own discomfort. Mia, my daughter, turned 9 this year. She is loud and funny and furiously confident in a way that makes my chest ache with something I can only describe as determination. I watch her sometimes, the way she moves through rooms without apologizing for the space she takes up, and I think about the 12-year-old sitting in the dark bathroom with the tap running, pressing her spine against the cold tiles and wondering what was wrong with her. I think about managing. My daughter will not be managed. Not by me, not by my mother, not by anyone. When she feels things, I say, I see you. Tell me. When she's scared, I don't say don't cry in front of people. When she falls, I check for wounds before I check for witnesses. It sounds small. It is enormous. My mother met Mia last year for the first time in 18 months. She looked at her and said, "She's so loud." I said, "Yes, she's wonderful, isn't she?" My mother opened her mouth and closed it. Mia ran off to chase the cat and my mother watched her go, and for a moment I thought I saw something on her face, something soft, something almost like longing. And I thought, you could have had this. You could have had a daughter who didn't spend 19 years learning to breathe in bathrooms, who showed up to your table as herself and stayed. You chose the ranking instead. I hope it was worth it. I don't know how to end this story neatly because it isn't over. My mother is older now, and sometimes I look at her and the anger is so mixed up with grief and love that I can't locate where one stops and the other begins. But I know this. I am not managing anymore. I am here, fully, loudly, without apology. The panic attacks still come sometimes. Quieter now. Less frequent. Familiar enough that I know how to sit with them instead of against them. And on the hard days, when the old smallness tries to creep back in, I think of my daughter running through a room taking up every inch of space she was made for. And I think that is what we are building here. Not perfection. Not the absence of pain. Just girls who know they are enough because someone showed them by refusing to pretend otherwise.